Reddy met the professor and his remarks, which really set the stage for where we were. And my good and my old friend, Congressman Bill Frenzel, who was the catcher on our baseball team, and got himself run over like my grandson in the game. And Pam Bresnahan, who is a close friend, former law partner with my daughter Julie, who is down there and with me years ago. Pam has been involved in the process in Washington from both being inside it and then outside, working mainly on judicial affairs, including working with Orrin Hatch and some of the committee. And we thought it would be interesting to have someone who's incredibly experienced in this to look at it from the staff side. We've got the academic side, we've got the staff side, and I'm not sure what the heck Bill and I stand for, but we survivors side, I guess. But Pam, before we get going on the issue, there is a question of bipartisanship, which is going to be coming up in the near future, which is there probably will be a vacancy in the Supreme Court by this summer. Now, we're going to be through. Well, we'll never be through with the health bill, but the health bill will at least not be in stage center, and this looks like a place where maybe if we're going to work our way out of these doldrums and so forth, a place where people can work together. So just give us an idea from your inside thing what this looks like and what we should look for in terms of what we'll hear about publicly.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. 2 points. There should be 2 Supreme Court vacancies. The sort of popular pundits are that Justice Stevens will retire at the end of July or sometime during July, and there'll be a nomination. It's sort of summer fun in the nation's capital. If you all have any desire to visit Washington when it's about 100 degrees and 90% humidity, and come watch Congress, or actually the Senate Judiciary Committee conduct hearings. It should probably be in mid-August or early September. The idea that a judicial confirmation hearing for either the Courts of Appeal or Supreme Court should be a bipartisan event, that there should be input from the minority and the majority, has fallen out of favor in the past few years. And there's been a lot of articles talking about how the confirmation process has spent an inordinate amount of time on sort of showboating, asking long questions that don't, and not listening, and talking to staff members instead of listening to answers. One of the things that a true bipartisan inquiry by the Senate Judiciary Committee could bring, perhaps, would be to see whether or not the next Supreme Court nominee believes in the rule of law and believes in reasoned decision-making. And for those of us who have actual clients that want the Courts of Appeals and the Supreme Court to rule based on some norm that has been set forth before, it would be a really good idea to have a person who's had clients, perhaps, a person who is well-versed in the law, and a person who can build consensus among colleagues. I mean, talked about bipartisanship in the Congress. There's also some notion that there may be some bipartisanship with respect to the Supreme Court. I guess a 5-4 decision in the Campaign Finance Act case may have been the prologue to that. So what we're hoping, Lou, is that, at least for purposes of bipartisanship, that the nominee will be somebody who is not politically controversial, who has a really strong background in either judging or lawyering, and is not considered to be either controversial in the profession where he or she was professionally, or in rulings if they're a judge.
Pam, in going back in the history, and I'm trying to think back, there was obviously impeach Earl Warren was a big issue with billboards around the country some years back. Then I'm trying to think who was on the Supreme Court that Jerry Ford was very upset with, but there's certainly been times where the Congress itself and certainly either party has taken off after Supreme Court judges in terms of wanting them thrown out.
Well, and they have also historically been sort of, every time the Supreme Court declares something unconstitutional or decides that there should be what some people would call judicial activism, there's always been a reaction with respect to the Supreme Court's rulings. When Brown versus Board of Education was decided, my memory was that there was a lot of controversy. There was a lot of trying to influence the court, trying to pare back the decision, a lot of subsequent legislation and that sort of thing. I think sort of what we can learn from the court, at least in the last 15 to 20 years, is that the more divided the court, the harder it is for clients and for people appearing before the court to figure out how to strategize, maybe to stay out of the court, maybe to stay out of an appellate court. And what you're finding because of mediation and arbitration and other kinds of decisions is people are resorting to private arbitration rather than try to figure out what a political court is going to decide. And as someone who spends a great deal of time representing lawyers and law firms and other professionals, you know, we have sort of abandoned our own system in some respects to try to give more consistent results for clients.
Let me ask you, if I've asked you to vote now, you're sitting as the House of Representatives, and the question basically in front of you is, do you believe that there should be in the Senate, in the other body, that there should be a filibuster allowed to prevent somebody from being nominated? How many of you would vote, want the Senate your party to filibuster in there to prevent the proposed nominee from being seated?
Interesting.
Any of you? You all want a filibuster? What is a filibuster? I'm sorry, I should usually do better in that. Very briefly, the Senate and the House rules are totally different. In the House rules, there's a rules committee, and you can do anything you want if you have the votes. Doesn't make any difference. You can make your own rules up and do it. Senate acts more by comedy. The Senate has a provision where if you're going to talk, you can't shut it off unless you have 60 votes. It used to be 66 votes, and that's why it's a lot more difficult sometimes to get things through in the Senate, and that's why the minority in the Senate has some rights, while the minority in the House has no rights. So I guess what I'm trying from you listening before and everything about bipartisanship, you know, is it possible when you come to such an important thing as a Supreme Court judge that you could work with the other party? If the other party nominates them, does that make that person wrong? No? So should the other party, should you be able to use whatever means are allowable to stop that person from being nominated? No. No. Raise your hands, all that think you should be able to use whatever means to stop from being nominated. Okay, and the other side, if you're not asleep, raise your hand. Well, yeah, well, it's always tough after lunch to get things going. We're sitting listening to the bipartisanship and the talks, and I was making a lot of notes and about it, and thinking to myself, what is the difference maybe when we were there and today? And I think there's a couple basic differences. One is money. I think money in our system has basically, if not corrupted it, poisoned our system. And a member's life is spent raising money. And I think the second thing that I see is people don't know each other. They truly don't know each other. And when we would disagree on issues, it would be on a matter of principle. Take Vietnam. we were talking before about the riots and all that. Really tough up there. It's a lot calmer than it was now. We would have some incredibly tough debates in the House floor, but Ab Mikveh, for instance, would be on the other side, and we could argue about it, but it was never personal. It wasn't, we didn't put a label on him. It never became personal. And Bill, the thing I think that's different today is that it's personal. You know, you just don't like somebody. I mean, you put a label on them, and you frankly don't want to know much about them. I mean, there's practically hate floating around in the atmosphere.
That's right. They're evil.
Yeah, that's.
They gotta go.
And John, when you were talking and you looked at those charts, which I think are great to look at and so forth, and they've gone up and down and that, but why is it today everybody's so mad at everybody else? I mean, they're just truly anger. And this health bill, the anger was, you could cut it with a knife.
You're right, and those charts can only tell us so much about partisanship in Congress, because that's just counting up roll call votes, and you know there's a whole lot of stuff. Most of the important stuff happens before the vote, and so you know, so those charts can't pick up any of the decline and the feelings that members have or don't have toward one another. But I think you're right that Congress is a much less collegial place than it once was.
There used to be a middle aisle in the Congress, and there isn't a middle aisle in the Congress anymore. And what has happened, in my opinion, is that the power now rests with the political parties because they can they controlled reapportionment. You know what that is? Every 10 years we got to reapportion the House, and it gets divided up usually by the state legislators. And it means that the more conservative people in the Republican Party usually are pushed and get the money in the nominations, and the more liberal people in the Democratic Party are pushed. So you go up there and you're locked in. And if you want money, who do you go to?
Well, that's right, and Norm Ornstein talked about the political activists. You know, these are the people that go around and try to recruit candidates and help them raise money and so forth. And the political activists, not the office holders, but just ordinary citizens, but they're active politically recruiting candidates. They've always been more partisan and more ideological on the left or the right than rank and file voters. But their prominence in the process, and maybe you're right, with the enormous amounts of money that it takes to run for Congress now, that these political activists have assumed just a much greater importance. And that probably explains why we see the same trends in the Senate. The Senate they don't change boundaries every 10 years. State boundaries don't change, but you've got the same activists out there that are recruiting the candidates, raising money for the candidates, and it you know, once upon a time there, you know, that moderates could win nominations, conservative Democrats or liberal Republicans could win nominations, but even if there are any of those potential candidates left, it's very unlikely that they would be able to raise enough money to win a party nomination.
Bill, what was the most you had to raise in the campaign?
My first campaign was $145,000. My last campaign was about $50,000. But I would guess that $145,000 in my first election, most money I spent, probably is the equivalent of close to $1 million today, if you bring it up to today's dollars.
I was just thinking, I had 3 campaigns, 2 primary and a general. I spent $150,000. Today, running in this seat with the chance to win $2 to $4 million.
And same in my district.
Each. And the governorship, 30 to 50 million. A lot of money. Think we ought to have public financing? Think the public should pay that much money, or should we? No.
Do you really think that'll solve the problem? I've thought about it because if we have public financing and we put a limit on what members can spend, unless we set that limit really high, isn't it just going to turn out to be an incumbent re-election plan? Because incumbents are already well known, and generally speaking, they're well liked in their constituency. And so unless a challenger is able to raise an enormous amount of money to make the point, I mean, to get known, and then to make the point that, the incumbent's really not doing as good a job as you think he is, that if you set it too low, nobody can spend more than $100,000, I think every incumbent's going to get reelected.
I would agree with philosophically. I have a hard time with public finance.
I don't buy it myself, and for the principal reason that every scheme I've ever seen, state or federal, has been an incumbent protection racket.
Pam?
Well, I mean, public financing has all the same problems as private financing, because if you set a limit, you get incumbents. If you set it too high, you may get a constant turnover and no institutional history in the Congress, which I think has become a problem. I mean, there's people that when I worked on the Hill, there were people that had been there a long time, and you want some institutional history and institutional relationships. I mean, that's what struck me this morning and listening to Norm Ornstein, that the institutional relationships are really gone. The staffers that all know each other, the people that respect other people's views even if they don't agree with them. I mean, it's and no matter what you do about campaign finance, that ends up being if you keep turning people over or you have too many incumbents, then you get people set in their ways. I don't think public finance answers that question.
Of course, some of those guys who are institutions, the janitors don't know whether to paint them or dust them when they go by.
Well, there was at least one senator that used to ride up and down in the elevator.
No, I think one of the solutions besides the financing end is in term limits.
I just was going to.
But they have to be more realistic. The Florida and California term limits are so low that hardly a chance for good legislators to emerge before they're out of there. But I think a little more extensive term limits might be helpful in the Congress.
In our Florida legislature, where you have term limits, the minute you're elected to the state house, you're running for the speaker. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. You get elected 8 years out, and you don't even know where the restrooms are. The other issue, I guess, that bothers me, and we've talked a little bit about it, is how do you break the code? We're sitting here. You've been listening. What suggestions would any of you have to break this problem we have, which is really pretty bad? I mean, what should we do? What should we tell the members to do, the members of Congress to do about it? Any ideas? Yeah. Could you bring a mic over here, please? Okay, good. I can yell too. Okay? That's...
Stop thinking about himself.
And maybe remember, when you take an oath on the floor of the House, it's not to the Democratic Party, it's not to the Republican Party, it's to preserve, defend, and protect the Constitution of the United States. Maybe if we start there, we can make some progress. But I agree philosophically with that, but what else? What practical things? What would you want to see from the Congress? Would you want to see a 5-day week that they have to go up there and spend Monday through Friday up there, and then maybe have a week coming home or something so they get to know each other? What?
Congress people should be able to vote for what they believe in and not based on like their political party and what it believes in. Yeah.
Do you think we ought to change from our system to a parliamentary system of government where you have to vote with your party? Is that what you want?
No, she wanted the opposite.
No, I know. So you like our system where you can sort of wander around and vote as you want to. Do you think that members of Congress, when they vote, should be influenced by offers of different various goodies for their district? I guess it depends what the goodies are. John, in the past, when major bills have come up, how much vote buying has there been?
Well, you're in a better position to measure that than I am.
Well, but I've asked you.
As a political scientist, I don't really think there's anything fundamentally wrong with that. I mean, when you say vote buying, you mean vote trading, right? I mean,
vote trading, yes, not buy, nothing illegal.
Yeah. I mean, that's politics, and that's the way politics has always worked. I'm going to disagree with my two new friends that I really think term limits is a bad idea. But I also agree that public financing is not the answer. But I think term limits are also not the answer. I think the answer to making Congress work better is to find a way to make more elections really competitive, so that voters have a realistic choice between two candidates that have the resources necessary to make their pitch and appeal to the voters.
And in Florida, we have made sure that we have made the districts safer for the incumbents. When reapportionment came up the last time, we had a coalition of the African American legislators, the Hispanic, and the Republican legislators, all on one side, and the Democratic legislators on the other side. And you scratch your head and say, that's sort of a strange coalition. But when you look at the geography of Florida, it is not strange, because Corrine Brown's district runs from up in the Jacksonville area all the way down to Orlando. It's, sort of a narrow thing and comes all the way down. And Corrine Brown cannot be beat in that district. There's no way she's going to win that district. But what the members of the legislature did is they put as many African Americans into that district as possible. And instead of having 4 competitive districts, we ended up with 1 district that was not competitive and 3 districts which favored the Republicans, because most of the African American vote would go to the Democratic Party. So it was a trade-off in that way, 1 for 3, and the districts in South Florida were created that way and so forth. Nothing to do with geography or anything like that, but it was purely a political deal, which means that in Florida, unless you really get yourself in trouble or it's one of those tsunami years, it's difficult. You got to work hard to lose.
But that's true in every legislature in the United States, with the exception of a couple, one being Iowa, one being Arizona, where they have nonpartisan election commissions who make the districts. Now, unfortunately, California just turned down a referendum on that subject, but there will be others coming up, and the Redistricting Commission is one way you get at this problem. And the problem you describe of making safe seats for both Republicans and Democrats means that you have more polarization, because the only way you can lose is in a primary or in a nominating convention. And so if you're a Republican, you go to the right, to the most active people in your party. You're Democrat, you go to the left. And redistricting is one of the important causes of the problems that are bothering the Congress right now with respect to lack of comity, is that the partisanship stems from the redistricting, which might be cured by commission systems.
Pam, do you have anything to add to that?
Or it could be cured by a redistricting that isn't serpentine. I mean, Maryland, where I come from, we did the same thing to make a safe seat for an elected African American congressman, and now the question, so that Congressman Hoyer would have a safe seat because he was going to be opposed and may have lost. So I guess maybe the bottom line is it's hard to balance all those things, but I think Frenzel's most important point was you don't, at the end of the day, you don't want to make it harder to come to compromise. And I just wanted to back up for a minute. One of the things that I thought was remarkable about talking about this today was watching all your reactions to all of us. And I just would like a show of hands of how many people think that it would be better to be a good politician and come to some compromise than have a slot on CNN as the most right-wing or left-wing liberal. Would you rather have policy or not? Or would you rather, I mean, there is a point at which the Congress stops working if no one passes laws. And that's what we're talking about.
You know, we, one of the last symposiums, some of you were here, we talked about the Millennials. And that's 85 million young people who in 2012 will be from, I think, 18 to 33. And you will be the single largest voting bloc in our country. How you vote is going to determine who the next president is going to be in 2012. So what we're talking about is not really just something academic, but it's something that you're going to have to face and hopefully figure out, or at least be comfortable with it. I think there's some things that can be done practically. For instance, it wouldn't be a bad idea to change the congressional schedule. You know, Norm suggested maybe 3 weeks up there and 1 week home, and do it that way so people would get to know each other. The problem now is you fly in on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, you vote, you go home on Thursday, and you vote with an electronic card so nobody's on the floor of the House. When Bill and I were there for a while, it was a roll call vote. It was Ford, Frenzel, Frelinghuysen, Frey, you know, down the list, and you go over and you try and get there for the vote. You never make it the first time, but you'd have to wait, so you'd wander the floor, you'd talk to people, you'd work on a bill, you would do stuff. You knew people. You knew who they were, you knew their families, you knew something about them. And even those of us who didn't have much money and had to commute, we usually lived 3 or 4 of us in an apartment, you know, with some beer and English muffins. It was high cotton, but it was cheap. And maybe we ought to give a housing allowance to the Congress for people to live up there with their families, because frankly, you can't afford to have a house here and a house up in Washington if you're a normal person. It's just too bloody much money. Just doesn't work. These are sure maybe small things, but we've got to move towards where people look at someone else not with a label, but as an individual, good, bad, or indifferent. Labeling is really, really dangerous. If John, if you had one thing to do, just one thing you could do about this issue, and I'm going to ask Bill and Pam, what would you do? What would be the one thing you would recommend? You don't get a whole bunch of them, you get one.
Well, I guess I would argue to go back to the American tradition of pragmatism and people actually looking for solutions rather than just promoting an ideology.
So, okay, that's fine, but what would you do?
I'll have to think about that for a little while. But I wanted to ask another question.
Okay.
Another proposal that I've heard a little bit about that hasn't got very much play yet is talking about expanding the size of the House. That with 435 members, the typical average congressional district now is over 630,000 people. And so the argument, you know, an argument can be made that, you know, that's really, House members used to know their constituents. Senators never really had that luxury, but House members, they used to know their constituents and could represent their district. So, you know, what would you think about expanding the size of the House to, say, 600? people and making, and then apportion it, as we do, and have smaller districts so that members could get to know their
Certainly
their
worth
constituents.
thinking about. You're, on the one side, you're thinking that may happen. On the other side, you may double your problems with it. But it's certainly worth thinking. Bill, what was the...
My problem with a larger house is that we do all of our work in committees. Our committees are too big now for kind of close relationships between the members, and therefore the work gets thrust down into subcommittees, takes longer to bubble up to the top, and is somewhat difficult to deal with. So my suspicion is that if we made more members to the House, members might be closer to their constituents, but it would be a little more difficult to work coalitions and compromises through the Congress, because there are too darn many people to talk to. In the old days, you only needed to talk to a few committee chairmen, and there was a tradition of leadership and followership. Now, every member is very independent, and you practically have to make 434 deals to get a bill passed. So it's questionable in my mind, but I agree when the districts get too big, you lose the personal relationships which really make the difference in the House. Because the one thing that gives you the armament to stand up to your party when they say you must vote with us is that you can say, look, you guys, you leaders of my party never cast a single vote for me at home. Those folks back there did, and they're relying on me to vote in their behalf, to use my best judgment in their behalf. So, I'm mixed on it, but it would bring that very important advantage of drawing the members closer to their constituents.
Going back to districts, though, another thing that's happened is that the kinds of preferences that Southern Democratic voters have now are pretty much the same as what Northern Democratic voters prefer. Whereas there was a time where Republican constituencies in some parts of the country had different views and policy preferences than Republican constituencies in other parts of the country, and that's how you got liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats. But that sorting that's gone on. Democratic constituencies nationwide all look very, very similar in terms of what groups are getting votes from, and the same for Republicans.
They have become more homogeneous. That the problem in both parties that wiped out the centrist members was that when the Republicans took over control of the House in 1994, they blew away all the moderate Democrats, and suddenly all the Democrats were lefties. And then in 2006 and 2008, when the Democrats came back, they blew away all the moderate Republicans. And between those two waves, we've cleaned out the center. It has collapsed, and we only have two very strong wings.
And very closely matched.
And that's another reason for the tensions. As long as you know every election and every vote you cast may make you a chairman or a nobody, you're very careful about giving any favors to the opposition.
One of the people in the book about it said that the problem was when 94 came and there was a change, the Republicans didn't know how to be in charge, didn't know how to act. And the Democrats had never been in the minority, and they didn't know how to act. And it was just a really bad duo that went on and really messed us up to where I think today I hope we're near the bottom.
That was 10 years of very bad example. The Democrats thought they were born to rule,
Yep.
and the Republicans thought they were born to be the oppressed. Suddenly the roles were reversed. Neither knew how to handle it. Both hated each other, and the program didn't work very well. And of course, that's what made Bill Clinton the hero, because the Congress was confused, and he was able to exercise some leadership.
Well, and also there was a whole generation of staff that turned over after the 1994 election. I mean, the generation that I started out with, they mostly were gone by either because it got too contentious or because of all the change in between minority and majority, staffers used to sort of ruling the roost were in the minority, and a lot of them left and went elsewhere.
Well, there's a lot of times where you wish some of the people went elsewhere, just period, with it. But Pam, how much influence does a staff person, you think, have just generally in terms of these issues? Is a staff person usually more partisan than the member, or vice versa?
I think that at least when I worked on Capitol Hill, the staff person was generally less partisan and had a lot of relationships with other staff members, whether they were Republican or Democrat and Democrat. A lot of them knew each other. A lot of them were locals like me who come from Washington, D.C., and so used to joke around, there's Democrats, Republicans, and then there's Washingtonians, you know. But I think that now, because of the fundraising issues that you describe, the staff is becoming much more partisan because they recognize their job is on the line, they've got to go raise money. And that has really affected a lot of the policy making from the staff side. Because the chief of staff half the time is out fundraising or working for congressmen to make sure that they make the right calls and show up in their district or show up at a joint fundraiser for so-and-so to make sure they get reelected. And that takes up a lot of staff time now that really didn't before. Even though there are certain rules against it, you know, they go to a PAC, they go to, you know, make sure they raise money.
Got to get off the hill to make a phone call, et cetera.
Right.
That. How many of you out there, okay, question, go on.
I just had a question about whether or not anyone's entertained changing our election system to more proportional representation. So maybe we open up the political forum for third parties, and that way when people go to the polls, they feel like maybe their candidate possibly has a chance. And you have a large segment of voters that are so disenfranchised by the two-party system that they feel like if they're going to cast their vote for a third-party candidate, that it's a wasted vote. So how about taking the House of Representatives elections, scrapping the whole single-member district system, making it more proportional, and opening up the system to third parties?
John? We brought the professor here just to answer this question. We knew it was coming.
Well, you're right. That would certainly change the system. But you're likely to get more extreme parties that way. If we have proportional representation, then you'd get some members elected from the Green Party, you'd get some members elected from the Libertarian Party. You might even have a Natural Law Party candidate elected here and there. And all of those parties are certainly not in the middle mainstream, which is where the compromise and the bipartisanship used to occur, was when there was a moderate middle. But you're right, it would change the system. I think it would make some voters a lot happier that feel very strongly about the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or whatever. But I would be very surprised if a majority of Americans found that appealing.
We've had, I'm trying to think, when I first ran, Wallace was running for president, and Humphrey as a Democrat, and Nixon as a Republican. Wallace was leading in the Southeast, and specifically in Florida, up till about a month before the campaign came to an end. And so you had to, as a Republican in a Democratic district running the first time, it was a little bit dicey trying to avoid the friendly fire on that one. Then there was Perot. What did he take? Nearly 20?
Yeah, but 19%
of the vote, which was really significant. But the problem with the third party is there's never anything under it. You have somebody running up here, but there's nobody running basically as a third party candidate for the House or Senate or down into the legislative thing. So there's no way to sustain the party. Go on, yeah.
And I know you saying, well, the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, but the reality is we're a system of majority rule with respect for minority rights. And there are Green Party citizens and libertarian systems, and why shouldn't they have a voice in the House of Representatives? If 10% of our citizenry are libertarians, why shouldn't 10% of the House of Representatives be libertarians?
We got a couple answers coming up. Great, we're waking up.
Stand up. I want to address one thing. You asked about disenfranchisement and proportional representation. One of the things that, as a lawyer, I would look at is what is really disenfranchisement, because basically we're the will of the majority governs. We're a democratic society, and so I'd like to know what your definition is of being disenfranchised.
When people feel that their vote doesn't count.
Okay, and if that is so, then how does proportional representation then address that when you go to specific policy, not to being elected, but to get to the policies that you want? Because that's the disenfranchisement that I worry about, is policy doesn't get passed and Congress does not act. And I've been in Washington for more years than I care to admit. I'm local. And what scares me now is nothing gets done. And proportional representation, I'm not sure takes care of that issue.
Well, every person that spoke so far has brought up that policy is often, good policy is overwhelmed by politics, right? And the two-party system often overwhelmed that good policy.
Right.
So if the Green... I'm a loud voice without the microphone. But if the Green Party candidate or the Libertarian Party candidate at least has a voice, they could influence policy, and then maybe the Democrats or Republicans maybe then take in that policy and adapt it and say, okay, you know what? There's a niche of voters that we can now really target if we're taking in that Green Party who's now here. Or you could have coalitions that form. So if the Democrats only have 40% and the Green Party has 12%, and the Libertarians have 10%, they could actually make a coalition to get some policy passed.
And that's basically a parliamentary system, and it works if there's compromise, right? It has to, because if the Green Party wants a reduction in carbon emissions of 55%, and they want, and the Republicans want a reduction in carbon emission of 5%, there has to be some consensus. And the question always becomes is whether or not you dilute that consensus with a third party. I'm not saying it's not a good idea, because I tell you, every time you get a third party running in the state legislature, everybody looks up. I grant you that one. But to actually get it finished and not have more conflict, because part of it is the stability everybody's talking about, no question about it. Now, I'm done cross-examining you. Thank you for letting me. Oh!
Yeah. But, you know, you talked about how candidates now fear if they don't fit with their own party. So you may have somebody that fears that if they're not Republican enough, that they're not going to fit with the Republican Party. Whereas if there was a third party, regardless of what it was, maybe that person wouldn't have to fit with the Democrat or Republican Party. And then they would be able to actually promote their policy rather than promote a party.
You know, they have a saying, you know, when a jury goes out, that you want them to come out in their favor from your mouth to God's ears, right? Yeah. That there should be more, but what you're talking about is something that was involved debate and discussion and not fundraising. And until we get the money out of the system, I got to tell you, they're going to be fundraising, because you can't have anybody there if they don't raise money. And that's Lou's right, that is the single worst thing in the system that has changed in the system today. You have one more thing to say, and then you're done.
No, that's great. All right, 20 seconds. 19. Good.
I think as young voters, what everybody here should realize is that we, as the people, have the power. And if we don't like the political system, it is your voice to influence the political process.
Go get him, Tiger. All right. Good job. All right, thank you. Thank you so much. That was really great. Please, Bill.
I was going to say that one of the problems with the proportional system is you have to get on your party's slate, no matter how small your party is. And so the people wind up voting for slates rather than for individuals, which may be an interesting way to proceed, but it is quite out of character with the precedents and the history of our country, where people like to be represented by other people whom they can see and touch. And I think there would be some difficulty in worrying about how you get on the slate, how you work yourself to the top, and then how do you identify. Right now we are identified with geographical areas, and so we know who our constituents are, and sometimes they know who we are, unfortunately. But in a proportional system, you don't know who the hell your constituents are. And they may not know who you are, particularly when they're casting their vote. So I'd be a little bit nervous about that, but it's an interesting suggestion. There are lots of other suggestions that people have used to promote proportional voting, some of which are these giving you a second vote if you don't get a majority the first time through. They're all kind of gimmicky, I'm afraid, when compared to our system. Any one of them might be an improvement. They would all be different, and we probably would never know until we tried them.
Yep. All right, let's get it back here, please.
You earlier said that there's great polarization, but if there's so much polarization, then why are so many more Americans becoming independent? And I believe that that's because every Republican and every Democrat has actually lost sight of what they represent. Everyone is misinterpreted. Nobody understands what it's really about because no one cares enough to actually say what it's about.
Could I answer that?
Sure. Here, John.
Earlier.
Wait, let him answer, and then you can come back. Just take a deep breath.
Well, let me go into my professor mode. If we believe the public opinion polls, which we should, I mean, understanding the limits of the polls, all of the evidence that I've looked at tells me that the number of independents in the electorate is not increasing. And it's kind of a fine point, but the way political scientists try to find out how many Democrats, Independents, and Republicans are out there is that we ask a question, generally speaking, do you consider yourself to be a Republican, a Democrat, an Independent, or what? And then, however the respondent answers, we follow it up and ask them, if they say Democrat or Republican, are you a strong Democrat or Republican or not so strong? Or if they say Independent, we ask them, well, do you think of yourself as being a little closer to the Republicans or a little closer to the Democrats? And in every public opinion poll that I have seen since the 1950s, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 out of 3 individuals who say, I'm an independent, admit that they lean toward one party or the other. And when we look at the way those independents who lean one way or the other vote, they're actually more partisan in their voting behavior for president than the weak partisans.
And that's my point, is Democrats and Republicans have lost sight of what they stand for, so that's why people lean to be a third party or independent, because they can't understand what they are saying, because in the media, everyone attacks everybody else and they don't see a clear understanding of what they're actually trying to accomplish.
Would you want to run for the Congress?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. How many of you would like to run for office after listening to all this and the problems? That's wonderful. That really is encouraging. You of course know the Congress's approval rating has hit just about an all-time low, 17% and falling, which is the approval of the Congress today. Go on, back there, other young man, please.
Hi, I just have a suggestion about reducing party influence. I was wondering, why is voting in the legislature not anonymous? It seems like if voting was anonymous, then there wouldn't be such a pressure for the representative to vote a certain way.
I'd really not thought about that. That's about opposite everything I believe. It doesn't mean it's a bad idea. I just had not thought about it. It would seem to me that as a constituent, you want to know what I believe, and that what I'm saying out loud is how I vote when it comes down to it.
At the same time, I think it kind of outweighs. I'd rather you vote how you believe than vote for how your party believes.
Well, I'm going to vote how I believe.
But you're going to vote for your party generally.
No.
If you don't vote for your party,
no,
you get...
No.
Okay.
I think you're putting
Sorry,
a label on me.
politicians vote for their parties, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I understand. I think you're putting a label on me and anybody else. I don't think that's true. I can tell you when Jerry Ford vetoed an education bill, and I was his chairman, state chairman, and I led the fight to overdo the veto because I thought he was wrong. I never felt that I had to do everything that the Republican Party wanted me to do. I was a Republican. Basically, my mom and dad were printers, had a small little business, came from that kind of background. I'd been in the service. I believed in a strong defense. I believed in less taxes. So I generally fit within the Republican Party up there. But I never thought any party or person had all the answers to our problems. And I wish it was that easy.
Right, but to a certain point, like you were saying that people are getting more right and more left. If they get more extreme, then they're more inclined to just stay with their party instead of...
Yes, absolutely right.
There's more of an influence by their party.
Absolutely right, and that's one of the basic problems we've been talking about.
So it just seems like an anonymity or having an anonymous vote would make more sense, even though the constituents wouldn't be seeing the results or knowing what the congressman is voting for. It would just make more sense for them to have less influence.
It's a good point. I would respectfully disagree with you, but I'd be glad to sit down and have a cup of coffee and solve the problem with you.
Well, and then when it came time for you to decide whether your representative was representing you and what you think is right, how are you going to decide whether he or she deserves your vote?
Maybe through the effects that we can see in our community. I'm sure that's not too relevant.
That's a good answer. That's a fair answer.
The idea of voting for your constituents over party is interesting, but what do you do when your judgment is different, you think, from the people in your constituency? There was a chap in the British Parliament by the name of Edmund Burke who who spoke in 1744 to the electors of one of his cities, Bristol. And he said, the representative owes you his best judgment. And if he defaults on that and tries to simply be an echo of your sentiments, he does you a great disservice. And for many years in this country, Edmund Burke was the patron saint of American politicians. Lately, he has come into disfavor, and he's still my patron saint, but I think the parties have kind of tried to banish him, and I think it would be wonderful if we could revive him somehow.
Well, do you know what happened to Edmund Burke when he stood for re-election next time?
He would lost.
But it's okay. That's what he wanted. He did.
We have a question over here, then we'll come back over that side, okay? Equal.
Okay, mine's short and sweet, but it was earlier when you said how Congress can improve. The thing is that the Constitution states, we the people. I think that the problem as a young adult is that all the media portrays for the government is bad. I think that if the Congress and the Senate and the House could interact more with the people as young adults and explain their points of views rather than just the media portraying them, it would make everybody more happy and more involved with their government, because everyone's right, we choose, no one else.
And that is one of the reasons we've had 15 symposiums that are doing a lot of other programs, because we agree 100% with you. We're not trying to tell you what to think, what to come up with as a final decision. We're just trying to tell you what the issues are and for you to make your own minds up. How about over here?
You asked earlier for a few practical solutions of what could help.
Please.
I think most of us here are our parents. If these kids have part-time jobs, we punch time clocks. So I think that they should be present in the chambers when they're needed there and expected to be there. I also think that maybe publishing their daily agenda, who they're meeting with outside of the chamber, who they're making their phone calls to. I know I'm a teacher. What I'm teaching in the classroom today has to be put on paper for accountability reasons. I don't think that would be beyond question to know who they had lunch with or made those 100 phone calls to that day, and maybe the purpose of those phone calls, if it was a lobbyist or someone. I think that maybe each state could have a house similar to what they do for a parsonage. And if you have 4 or 6 senators and congressmen in Washington, they can bunk up in a house that's maybe Florida owns, something like that, instead of individual houses to keep costs down. And maybe using Skype, that many of us, technology, it's the way to go. Talk to us in person, Skype at the end of the day, tell us what you did. Tell us what you voted on. That's all, thank you.
We have Facebook and we Twitter and we twit. Okay.
I think another issue to ponder would be the lobbyists in Congress and maybe suspending those lobbyists. With the latest Supreme Court ruling on the campaign finances, what about suspending those lobbyists? Maybe just getting the politicians focused on the issues, rather who's feeding them money or who's trying to buy them.
Pam,
Maybe
do you
hear
want
your
to
thoughts
talk
about that.
Well, there's a lot of presuppositions there that I'd first like to say that there's lots of people in Washington that provide information to Congress because they're not omniscient, God bless. So I think what I'd say to you is that a lot of times lobbying efforts are to provide information so that a congressman or congresswoman could exercise his or her independent judgment. So part of it is, and some of it is constituent based. You know, the state of Florida has trust me, a very large lobbying network in Washington. So a lot of it is what Lou was talking about. People know you, they understand the issues. It's not, the press unfortunately has portrayed lobbying and discussion and debate only from the fringes. That's why most of the congressmen from my state, I'm sure you all have never heard of. Maybe Congressman Hoyer, who's the majority leader, but that's it. Because you don't have the people discussing things on Fox News, they're generally, or on MSNBC because they're yelling at each other, which I think is unfortunate for the next generation of people who vote. And whoever it was that said, the more you interact, come to Washington, meet your congressman, they all want to meet you because they know you're the next generation of voters, the better off you all are, because you'll understand the system a lot better than, what's his name, Sean Hannity can explain it to you.
A lot of times for the youth, I'm only 23 years old, so I'm just learning a lot more too, is everything is long-term. This healthcare, long-term, this long-term. I feel more things should be short-term, so we feel like our vote does matter with all these passing bills, because everything is, once again, long-term, then why do you want the youth's vote so bad?
Well, the problem is that democracy is not a form of government that works well in the short term, or at least it's a system that virtually demands that politicians and policymakers look to the short term because the long term is just too far away.
And let me give you an example of where we have messed up as a country. Energy. In 1973, we were importing 23% of our oil, and we were doing research on it, liquefaction of coal, gasification of coal, ocean thermal energy, hydrogen electric car. Doing that because there was a long-term problem. Some of us said, gee, if you don't do anything about it, somewhere down the line, we're going to be importing 70% of our energy and turn our economic future over to people who don't like us. Guess what? 73% of our oil is now being imported. We have no control over the price, and the biggest problem in the United States was getting people to look long-term, to understand that doing something in 73 wouldn't solve the problem in 75 or 78, but would have solved the problem by today. In the United States, we tend to react, not act. That is one of the basic problems of our country. We put it off and put it off and put it off until it bites us in the nose. And we've done that with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. If we don't take care of those three problems, they'll eat up 73% of our budget, and we will be broke. I don't care whether you have health care or what you have. So the world that you live in is just not short-term gratification. You got to put it in an entire picture, and your responsibility as a member of Congress is to be able to look past your nose in the next election.
Well, but then... and fortunately, we have had, and hopefully we still have a few politicians that are willing to do that. But the alternative is to go to a system with central planning where you have omniscient government bureaucrats.
There's no such thing.
Making these making these decisions, and we as Americans, value our freedom too much. And
Good question, though. You hit a button, I guess. Go ahead. Back here.
It was mentioned earlier that we aren't as united as a country. Do you think that's because people feel pressured to fall into either the Republic or Democratic Party instead of opposed to being just independent?
Bill?
Well, I think our society has become split, and it's become more complex. You remember the charts we were shown a little earlier, and showed a lot of bipartisanship and lack of partisanship in the 50s and 60s. In my judgment then, we were more unified. We had just come out of a war. We were trying to build our economy up. We were trying to realize the American dream in education. We had a nice bad man, but he was offshore. He was the USSR, and we all hated him. We didn't hate each other. And times were pretty good, and we had what you might have called a kind of a common sense of purpose. And as we have gone forward, we have changed a little bit. We've had different kinds of immigration. Our people have grown up. Electronic world has changed for us. We are all now having different values rather than exactly the same values. And that makes it much more difficult for your representatives to be able to pin you down and find a real majority or a real consensus that they can follow. I think they do the best they can, but you can help them by maintaining your communication and being sure that they know how at least you feel about any given subject.
Pam?
Yeah, I had the opportunity this past year to go to Warsaw, Poland, and I met with members of the Supreme Court, and they are like in our 50s. They're very unified. They have a common enemy, and their court system was completely collapsed 3 times, not once, not twice. And the justice I talked to lived through the war and described to me that how wonderful it was to have the first jury trial in Poland ever because of the way the Eastern European system. That kind of unity reminds me of the 50s because there wasn't diversity, because they were trying to rebuild. And we now have rebuilt after the war, and we now have a technologically driven society that's very diverse. And I agree with Bill that when you have such a diverse community, to try to serve the interests of that community is very difficult. And the only way that you do that as an elected member of Congress is to hear from your constituents. How many people are in a congressional district now? 600,000, some ridiculous sum.
Between 650, 700.
There's 600, for each congressman elected, there's 650 to 700,000 constituents. If we don't hear from you as an elected official, then your voice won't be heard. And that's really why, that's why I flew down here for the day. I'd like to see at least one of you show up in Washington as an elected official, and then, they can ask you these questions.
Okay, right over here.
This pertains to one of the earlier subjects, when it's something that the government can do in order to get young people and young adults to vote. One thing is when candidates go up and try to speak to us, or they make what I consider false promises. So one thing is, don't promise anything that you can't actually do. And if you do have that goal in mind, say what certain steps you can take in order to achieve them. And when questions are asked to certain government officials, they won't even answer them directly. They will go around the bush and try to answer or go to a completely different subject.
Good idea. I think Bill and I have been accused of a lot, but that's not one of the things.
No.
Back here.
You say that you want to hear from those you represent, but sometimes you don't really have ways that we can get in touch with you. How would you recommend that we contact you besides just letters and phone calls? Couldn't you set up some way online that we could send you emails, that you could have a chat room of some sort, that we could be bouncing opinions and ideas off of each other?
All good points. What we have for the Institute is we have a website, we have a Facebook, we have a Twitter and tweet, and anything else my grandson can think of. And I think you're right, but one thing when you're dealing with the Congress and with the issue, remember the easiest place to see a member is in his or her district office when they come home. It's a lot easier to see them here with the schedule than up there. And when you write a member of Congress, I would read all my mail, but a lot of it would be the same. It would be a petition. Vote for Bill 1234. It is a good bill. I figure that person hadn't the slightest idea what Bill 1234 was, and somebody shoved it in front of them. On the other hand, if I got a letter that was either handwritten or hand-typed and you could see it in that, I'd focus on that letter. Sometimes I'd even call the person. So try and personalize what you're doing with your member as much as you can. And remember, today with the emails, you know, people are flooded 300, 400, 500 emails a day. Sometimes you're better off using snail mail, which is the regular mail system, and mailing it to the district office than up to Washington. Bill, do you have any ideas of how to get through?
No, but I will tell you that contrary to public opinion, most congressmen are dying to hear from their constituents, whoever they may be. They're looking for ways to meet them, to enter into communication with them. I used to wander about my district, wander into high schools, whatever, looking for people to talk to, and often I would be ignored in bowling alleys or supermarkets or whatever. So choose whatever means you need to communicate. I suggest that sending email, you're probably going to receive some kind of relatively canned response, because your congressman is going to get several thousand emails a day or a week at least, and the only way he can do is bunch them and batch them and send them back to you. But if you want to talk to him, Lou's got the right idea. Every congressman has an office in the home district. You call and you make an appointment. You may have to wait a couple weeks, but you'll get your turn. You get your 10 minutes of fame, and give her hell.
Yeah, and the other thing, when you go in with a one-pager. You know, if you can't put whatever problem is in one page, it ain't going to work. The member will look at it and the first 30 seconds decide, you know, how much sense it makes. So attach something, put a one-pager, and your first sentence is your most important sentence. Like, you know, I've got an idea that'll save the country gas money. Whatever it is, first sentence has really got to be critical. How about back here? And we'll come back to the other side.
Goes back to what you were saying about the third-party systems and proportional representation. I don't know about everyone else, but when I was growing up, my parents always described elections as choosing between the lesser of two evils. And so
not the only ones.
So for the longest time,
Your
I didn't even know.
parents were typical.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there were even third parties for the longest time, and it just seems like if everyone sees it as, like you said, the lesser of two evils, then why shouldn't there be other parties? And you were saying that if there were a bunch of parties, a bunch of smaller parties, that they'd have to compromise more, and that you said it like it was a bad thing. But wouldn't that be bipartisanship if they had to compromise?
Yeah. You were talking about the proportional thing, I guess.
Yeah. It would. It's just that I think that if there were more small parties, that they would be parties farther away from the center, and the farther away you get from the center, ideologues on the left or right are much less willing to compromise than those that are in the middle.
I think the other problem there is when you have a fractionated government and you have to have a coalition majority, it may be that the smallest partner in that coalition can drive the policy because they refuse to support anything else. If you looked at that health care bill, you saw there were 5 Democrats in the House who were very much anti-abortion. And they were able to drive that policy completely, although most of the rest of the Democrats would be what you might call pro-choice. But they had to concede to the smaller group to make the deal because they needed the majority. That's what happens in these so-called coalition governments. You can see them in Western Europe frequently.
Israel.
Mrs. Merkel in Germany is now struggling with her coalition partner. Extra parties are interesting if the public wants to support them, but they are not an unvarnished blessing.
Okay, we got time for a couple more questions.
All right, this is connecting on that thing you said before on the action and reaction, how you were saying that right now we import around 20% of our foreign resources.
No, I said we were back then. We're now importing over 70%.
Yes, we're now importing over 70%. When you said that you wanted people to react to it, you got to appeal to like an immediate threat, because most people only appeal to things that apply to them in the present tense. If you say that, oh, before long or soon from now, then people aren't going to really, it's not going to really affect them. They're not going to think, oh.
So you want me to lie to them?
No, you have to, I'm saying you have to show how it's going to affect them in tomorrow or a week from now or something that's going to affect them immediately, because that's how people respond. Not if you tell them, oh, 40 years from now or 50 years from now or 60 years from now, because they're going to think, oh, that's not me, that's not going to affect me, so I don't have anything to worry about.
That's a good point. And if you can figure out how to do it, I'll hire you. Very frustrating to have an issue that's there and to have it done. But we've done the same thing with that. We've done the same thing with the fiscal issue. We're leaving you a wonderful bunch of debt. People, I think, are just going to have to be mature enough to look down the line and say, well, it isn't tomorrow, but, you know, I've got a responsibility to my kids or grandkids, and maybe I better worry about it. But if you've got a better way of putting it, believe me, I'd love to hear it. Okay, a couple questions up here in the middle. We've had nothing from the middle, and we'll get 2 or 3 more.
Middle.
And then we'll,
yes,
yeah.
There's the broad center.
This is I wish there was a center like this in Congress.
All I've been hearing all these past couple hours is about parties. Couldn't we just have like good people that want good things for the community and stop worrying about parties so much? Or is parties really that important?
Want to answer that, John? The party, like it or not?
Well, this is a country of over 300 million people. What, 130 million cast votes in the last presidential election. And so if you think about the task of putting together a coalition somewhere among 130 million voters, how are you going to do that one by one, individual by individual? And the way we've done it throughout our history is that we've had institutions like political parties that go around and put together coalitions. They organize interests. They put together a coalition of farmers and merchants and so forth, and organize them around a slate of candidates and try to get them elected, and then produce policies that help them solve their problems. And political scientists haven't, or nobody that I know of has come up with a way yet to organize elections and to organize government in a way that we can elect candidates in a big, diverse country like this, and also produce policies from our legislature without some kind of an institution like political parties to organize all of the conflict.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, it seems like we all have regionally much different ideas of what we want, and sitting here personally listening to about the big bad political parties, it's kind of depressing to me. So why would we keep these big political parties? What are the benefits? Why not break it down to more, not even Republican or Democrat, but people with smaller, have political parties for each small idea instead of having one and saying, this is all the beliefs that we have.
All that it needs is your organization. Right now, there are parties and people are willing to support their candidates and to let them raise money to support the candidacies and ultimately the policy. If you have a great issue or a policy around which you can organize enough friends to elect somebody, go to it. It's the right way to do it.
It's what you describe as a grassroots organization for the school board or the city council. And I think John's point before was when it gets to 130 million people, how you slice and dice that per issue is very difficult. I don't know if you all looked at any part of either convention, but there's a platform that brings together all these coalitions with special interests, like whether they're pro-choice or if they want to have certain rural subsidies or whatever the issue is. And those behind the scenes people work on what they call planks of the platform for all during the convention to try to fit all those constituencies, because 130 million people, it's hard to bring to any kind of consensus. So you're right, it's just the numbers become overwhelming to get anybody elected when you get to a presidential elected. But for school board, for a bunch of neighbors getting together to decide they're going to run somebody for a district seat on their city council, happens every day.
And what about getting the millennial generation together, your age group in that for the next thing, and come up with 2 or 3 issues that's key to that, to your group, and push those?
Or even on a state level. I mean,
Yep.
if you think about your state of Florida, in a statewide election, don't you have, what, 6-7 million votes cast?
And sometimes an extra 500 if you need them.
Oh, that's
Go ahead.
terrible.
I'm sorry.
It's the end of the day. Nobody heard that.
We have the responsibilities. We can't ask you for too much. We need to educate ourselves. We need to learn, read more about the history, and not about Lady Gaga lyrics or shop or clubs or like that. If we could improve our country. Now, my question is, I like that teacher idea when you say how we can improve to be more in contact with our congressmen. On top, like one question I would like to say, I like when President Obama brought the majority leaders of the Democrats and the House and the Republicans sat on TV for us, all of us, to see what's going on in a true, honest debate, quote unquote, true, honest debate. So maybe if we could see more of that debates on television, perhaps before any bill passed, by like 1 hour TV, when people could see exactly what's going on between back and forth, so we could hear, like yesterday, for example, that we don't know who called baby killer, for example, or the yelling and the shouting, so we could corner these bad politicians or the lawmakers, and we could know who we are really voting for, and the reality of these people, instead of being behind doors and pretending someone else to be somebody else.
Good idea. And unlike the Congress, as you know, Florida's got the Sunshine Law and the provisions for openness, like all the debates, a lot of the debates on the healthcare issue have been closed and haven't been broadcasted, but hopefully we can maybe spill over what Florida believes in nationally. I think that would be a good idea. Okay, go on.
Hi, what I want to know is how much do you think the partisanship is unique to the issues, instead of, we had all the issues that could be reached through consensus have already been done, and now we're left with just ideologies that are clear dichotomies.
Well, John, does your chart show you an answer to that?
Well, no, those charts don't tell me anything at all about what the issues were. But if we just look at the current health care bill that just passed the House last night, I haven't gone through part by part and provision by provision, but my impression is that a large majority of those provisions were originally Republican proposals that have been proposed at various times over the last 30 years.
Absolutely.
A lot of good in the bill, and a lot probably not so good. 2 last questions, one here, and then I think there was one here in the center. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. I missed the morning session, so this could have been mentioned already, but I'd be really interested to hear the panel's thoughts on opening primaries as a means of injecting moderation back into government.
Opening primaries.
What do we want, open primaries?
Open primaries.
Yeah. Oh, an open.
Open primary.
Well, it's up to, in first place, it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's up to each state.
It's a state legislative
not
initiative. It's
not a
not the federal
congressional.
government that governs it.
Some habits.
I would like to agree with the questioner. I love open primaries, and particularly open presidential primaries, because I think that gives everybody a greater choice. But it is a matter of the laws of the states. The states have been very comfortable, and the political parties within the states, in controlling their own primaries and not wanting crossover votes to determine who will be running. So you're swimming upstream on that one, but I think it is a good fight.
Okay, last question. Yeah, excuse me. Yes, sir.
Mr.
and
Ms. Speakers.
Could I?
Yes. Oh, sure.
I disagree. I think open primaries are not a good idea. And I'll go back to my team analogy, and the way I explained it to my students at Texas A&M, I said, when we're getting ready for that big football game with TU, that's what we call the University of Texas with a small t and a small u, instead of letting, our team and the coaches here pick the quarterback, let's just open it up to, to a vote of the students and let all of the students at both universities vote. And I said, do you really want those, those Longhorns over there at the University of Texas voting on who your quarterback is going to be? And they never say they want that. And so, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think political parties are that way. Political parties need to be choosing and ought to be choosing candidates that are going to propose the kinds of policies that are going to appeal to the interest and the voters that they want, that they want to help. That you really don't want people from the other party coming over and trying to sabotage that decision, and by voting for the weakest candidate or the most extreme candidate or somebody that can't possibly win.
Okay.
Mr. and Ms. Speakers, today the health reform bill has been brought up multiple times, and I want to know if you all were still in Congress today or in Congress period today, how would you have voted last night, yay or nay?
Nay.
I vote no.
No.
And you, sir?
I've never been in Congress.
Well, if you were in, how would you have voted?
Oh, I would have voted yes.
Yes, okay.
Good question, I think. No,
Great
fair question. Listen, thank you. Thank you very much. It's just been a lot of fun, very interesting, great questions. As you know, the next symposium is going to be in the fall, September 27th. It's going to be about the future jobs in Florida, space, high tech, and beyond. Bill Nelson has agreed to be the keynote speaker. It'll be a really interesting time because the midterm elections will be a little more than 30 days, so it'll be quite an interesting time politically. We hope to see you all back. We just can't thank you enough for your questions, your courtesy, and your great ideas you come up with. So have a good summer.
Thank you.